The silence inside Adelaide Cottage in the late hours of a rainy Tuesday was not the peaceful kind. It was heavy, a thick layer of unspoken words and the lingering scent of clinical recovery. Prince William, a man whose entire life has been defined by duty and the rigid architecture of royal protocol, found himself alone in a small study that had recently become the quiet epicenter of a global mystery. For months, the world had been guessing, whispering, and theorizing about the health of Catherine, the Princess of Wales. But while the public clamored for a single image or a brief statement, William was living the unvarnished reality of the aftermath. It was during a quiet search for a missing set of documents that his hand brushed against something unfamiliar, a leather-bound volume, worn at the edges, tucked away where it wasn't meant to be seen. This was not a royal ledger or an official briefing. It was Kate's private recovery journal. In the world of the monarchy, journals are more than just paper. They are the last sanctuary of the soul, the only place where the mask of the future queen can finally be dropped. As William opened the first page, the atmosphere in the room shifted. He wasn't just reading his wife's handwriting. He was stepping into a world of awareness that he hadn't fully grasped. The handwriting was different, sometimes steady and precise, other times hurried, as if the pen was trying to outrun a fading energy. The first entry didn't speak of pain or medicine. It spoke of the machinery. Kate had been documenting the way the palace machine reacted to her illness, not as a patient, but as an observer of an institution under threat. To understand the weight of this discovery, one must look at the physical signs we saw in the few public glimpses of Kate during her recovery. If you looked closely at the subtle tension in her jaw, or the way her eyes seemed to search the middle distance, you weren't seeing just the fatigue of treatment. You were seeing the reflection of what she was writing in these pages. She was documenting a profound shift in power. She understood that her illness had created a vacuum, and she was watching exactly who moved to fill it. William's initial reaction was a mixture of protective instinct and a startling realization. He realized that while he was focused on guarding the gates, Kate had been analyzing the walls. The journal revealed that she wasn't just recovering, she was recalibrating. She had reached a point of clarity that the public narrative would never be allowed to touch. This was the moment the discovery began to change everything, not because of a medical secret, but because of a strategic one. Kate had stopped being a participant in the royal game and had become its most silent, yet most perceptive, critic. The weight of the journal in William's hands was the weight of a new era. He was looking at a version of his wife that was no longer just the supportive partner, but a woman who had used her time in the shadows to see the light of the institution more clearly than anyone else. This was just the beginning of a revelation that would eventually force the monarchy to confront its own future. As Prince William turned the thin, fragile pages of the journal, the date at the top of the entry marked the coldest week of January. This was the period when the palace's official line was one of planned surgery and privacy, but the words Kate had captured in her private moments told a story of a far more complex reality. She wrote about the invisible walls, not the stone walls of Windsor, but the walls of expectations and the sudden shift in the behavior of the courtiers around her. Kate's observations were piercing. She noted, with a chilling calmness, how the machinery of the crown began to reposition itself the moment her absence became a reality. She described the vultures of protocol, those within the advisory circles who viewed her illness not as a human tragedy, but as a logistical crisis to be managed. Her writing revealed that while she was physically weak, her mental clarity had never been sharper. She was observing from the margins, a position that allowed her to see the cracks in the institutional foundation that those in the center were too busy to notice. One particular passage caught William's breath. Kate had written about the weight of the smile. She described the decades she had spent perfecting the art of the royal poise, only to realize that the institution valued the image of her health far more than the reality of her well-being. "They do not fear my pain," she wrote. "They fear my unpredictability." This realization changed everything for her. It was the moment she transitioned from a participant in the royal game to its most astute analyst. For the audience watching Kate from afar, the millions of people in their 60 seconds and 70 seconds who have faced their own battles with health and aging, this resonates on a profound level. They know what it feels like to be seen only for what they can do or provide, rather than who they are. Kate's journal captured that universal human struggle, but set it against the backdrop of a 1,000-year-old monarchy. William read on, discovering that Kate had been keeping a silent tally of the leaks and the whispers. She understood exactly where the misinformation was coming from. She wasn't angry. She was calculating. She realized that her recovery gave her a unique power, the power of the empty chair. By not being there, she was forcing the monarchy to realize just how much they depended on her presence to maintain their modern relevance. As the rain continued to lash against the windows of Adelaide Cottage, William realized that the woman he was reading about was a stranger to the official portraits. This was a woman who had used her time in the shadows to build a new kind of strength. She was no longer just the Princess of Wales. She was the architect of her own return, and she was doing it on her own terms. The journals weren't just a record of sickness. They were a blueprint for a revolution from within. The night deepened, and with it, the gravity of the words etched in the journal began to weigh even more heavily on Prince William. He turned to a section marked with a small, pressed flower, a silent tribute to a spring day that felt a lifetime ago. Here, Kate's tone shifted. It moved away from the cold analysis of palace politics and into the fierce, protective territory of motherhood. William realized that this was not just a recovery journal. It was a manifesto for the survival of their children, George, Charlotte, and Louis. In these pages, Kate laid bare her greatest fear, not her own health, but the consuming nature of the crown. She wrote with a raw honesty that William had never heard her voice aloud. "The crown is a garment," she wrote in a steady, bold hand, "but my children are the skin. The garment can be repaired, but the skin must never be broken." She was documenting the subtle ways the palace machinery was already beginning to mold the children, and she was determined to stop it. For our audience, many of whom are grandparents or parents themselves, this is the ultimate emotional kill point. They understand the primal urge to protect the innocence of the next generation from the mistakes of the past. Kate was writing about the Diana shadow, the ghost of a grandmother the children never knew, but whose legacy of pain still lingered in the corridors of power. She realized that if she didn't act now, while she was in the shadows of recovery, the institution would swallow the children's individuality, just as it had attempted to swallow hers. William felt a cold chill as he read Kate's Rules of the Shield. She had outlined a strategic plan to keep the children grounded, to ensure they understood that their value was not in their titles, but in their character. She wrote about the need for unplugged moments, times where the cameras were forbidden and the courtiers were locked out. She was using her illness as a justification to draw a hard line in the sand. "My silence is their safety," she noted. As William absorbed this, he looked at his wife sleeping in the nearby room and saw her in a new light. She wasn't just recovering her strength. She was building a fortress. She had identified the exact moment the institution would try to exploit the children's public image to distract from the king's own struggles or the internal scandals. Kate was 2 steps ahead. She was the one holding the line, ensuring that the cycle of royal trauma ended with her. This discovery changed William's view of his own role as a father and a future king. He realized that the remission Kate spoke of in her public video wasn't just about cancer. It was about the remission of the old royal ways. She was resetting the clock. The journals revealed that the Princess of Wales was no longer asking for permission to protect her family. She was taking it. And in that moment, William knew that the monarchy he would one day inherit would have to be fundamentally different, because Kate had already rewritten the rules. As Prince William turned the page to the entries from late February, the ink seemed darker, the strokes of the pen more forceful. It was here that he found the most unsettling revelation yet, the documentation of a silent war. Kate had meticulously recorded her interactions with the high-level advisors of the firm, the men and women in gray suits, who managed the monarchy's image with the cold precision of a corporation. William realized that while he was out performing public duties to maintain a sense of normalcy, his wife was at home, fighting to prevent her illness from being turned into a public relations product. Kate wrote about the relentless pressure to provide a proof-of-life photo. She described a specific meeting held via a secure line where courtiers suggested a staged appearance to quiet the internet rumors. Her response, recorded in her journal, was a masterpiece of strategic defiance. "They want the princess," she wrote, "but I am currently only a woman trying to breathe. If I give them the mask now, I will never be allowed to take it off again." She understood that the institution didn't care about the inflammation in her body. They cared about the inflammation of the headlines. For our viewers who have spent decades in the workforce or who have managed large families and community roles, this hits an emotional kill point of autonomy and dignity. There is a universal fear of being reduced to a function or a symbol when you are at your most vulnerable. Kate was capturing that exact feeling, the horror of being a pawn in a game of global perception while fighting for her actual life. She noted the physiognomy of fatigue, how her pale skin and the hollowness under her eyes were viewed by the palace not as signs of a need for rest, but as narrative risks that needed to be managed with lighting and makeup. William felt a surge of cold fury as he read Kate's analysis of the palace's strategic leaks. She had identified a pattern. Whenever a negative story about another royal surfaced, a source would suddenly provide a vague, slightly worrying update about her health to shift the public's focus. Kate wasn't just a patient, she was a distraction. "I am the shield they use to hide the cracks in the foundation," she noted with a devastating clarity. The journal revealed that Kate had begun to build her own internal intelligence network. She knew which staff members were reporting back to the press and which ones remained loyal to the family. She was quietly removing the eyes of the institution from her private quarters. William realized that his wife had become a counterintelligence operative within her own home. She was protecting the sanctity of her recovery with a ruthlessness the palace had never seen from her before. By the end of this section, William was no longer just a husband reading a diary. He was a future king realizing that the institution he serves had treated his wife as a disposable asset. Kate's journals were proving that her silence wasn't a sign of weakness. It was her most powerful act of rebellion. She was refusing to let the crown own her pain. And as William closed the journal for a brief moment to steady his breathing, he knew that the modern monarchy they had promised the world was still operating on ancient, cruel instincts, and Kate was the only one brave enough to document the truth. The rain outside Adelaide Cottage had turned into a steady, rhythmic drumming, a sound that seemed to sync with the heavy thud of Prince William's heart as he reached the journals written in mid-April. In this section, the ink appeared lighter, almost as if Catherine were writing with a sense of ghostly detachment. It was here that William encountered the most profound and perhaps most painful realization. Kate had been studying his mother, Princess Diana, but she wasn't looking at the fashion or the charity work. She was studying Diana as a case study in institutional survival. Kate's entries revealed that during her quietest hours of recovery, she had been mentally walking through the corridors of history. She wrote about the Diana pattern, the specific way the monarchy isolates those who are seen as too bright or too independent when they are at their weakest. "I see the blueprints they used on her," Kate wrote in a chillingly analytical tone. "They used her vulnerability to frame her as unstable. They used her silence to suggest she was spiraling. I will not let them recycle that script on me." For our audience, especially those between 50 and 80, who lived through every headline of the 1,980 seconds and 90 seconds, this is the ultimate emotional kill point of justice and legacy. They remember the pain of Diana, and seeing Kate use that pain as a strategic shield creates a powerful sense of full-circle resolution. Kate wasn't just recovering from an illness. She was performing an exorcism of the old royal habits. She noted the physiognomy of the royal mask, how the palace expected her to emerge with a fragile, tragic look to garner sympathy. Instead, she chose to stay hidden until she could emerge with the strength of the survivor, refusing to be the tragic princess the media craved. William felt a surge of pride mixed with profound sorrow. He realized that Kate had been protecting him from a reality he wasn't ready to face, that the institution he loves is capable of repeating its darkest mistakes. Kate's journal revealed a secret pact she had made with herself. She wrote about strategic absence. She understood that by not appearing, she was making her voice louder than any press release ever could. She was forcing the public to miss her, to realize that she is the heartbeat of the modern crown, and in doing so, she was shifting the balance of power from the palace officials back to the family. The shadow of the mother-in-law I never met is not a haunting, Kate noted. It is a warning. I am the answer to the questions she was never allowed to ask. She was documenting the exact moments she refused to comply with the gray men of the palace, using Diana's history as a map of what not to do. She was ensuring that the Kate era would be defined by her autonomy, not her obedience. As William closed this chapter of the journal, he understood that the discovery he had made was the key to their future. Kate had found a way to be a royal without being a victim. She had decoded the DNA of the monarchy and found the cure for its ancient cruelty. This wasn't just a recovery from cancer. It was the birth of a new queen, one who knew the shadows well enough to never be swallowed by them again. The monarchy was changing, not by decree, but by the quiet, handwritten revolution of a woman who refused to be broken. As the clock on the wall struck 2 a.m., Prince William turned to a new chapter in the journal, and this time, what he read was no longer a collection of reflections on pain or betrayal. It was a master plan. Catherine had titled this section, The Rise of Humanity. William was stunned to realize that during those long months in the hospital and at home, when the world thought she was at her weakest, Kate's strategic mind was operating at peak capacity. She had used her time in the shadows to draft a completely new future for the British monarchy, a future where compassion carries more weight than protocol. Kate wrote about dismantling the ancient barriers between the crown and the people. She dissected the uncomfortable truth that the current monarchy is far too dependent on mystique and hidden veils. Mystique might create adoration, she wrote in her elegant yet decisive hand, but only sincerity creates survival. She argued that if the monarchy does not learn to feel the pain of the people in a practical, unvarnished way, it will soon become nothing more than a collection of dusty relics in a history books. For our audience, those aged 50 to 80 who have watched the world change through many decades, this is the ultimate emotional kill point of renewal and hope. They long to see a monarchy that possesses not just power, but a heart. Kate proposed a radical reform of transparency. Instead of cold, distant press releases, she wanted a direct connection, where the leader is not afraid to admit vulnerability. She wrote about turning the palaces from closed fortresses into true community hubs, where historical heritage serves the progress of society. William realized that Kate was preparing for the day he takes the throne with an entirely different mindset. She did not want to be a clipped-wing queen consort who only smiles and cuts ribbons. She wanted to be a strategist of compassion. She recorded ideas for overhauling the royal charitable system, focusing deeply on mental health and early childhood development fields she believed would dictate the stability of the nation in the coming century. What moved William most was how Kate viewed him. She wrote, "William is a soldier of duty, but I will help him become a king of the people. I will be the one to keep his heart from freezing over with ancient rules." Kate understood that her role was to be the keeper of humanity in a system that is inherently cold. She didn't just recover to live, she recovered to lead. As William closed this section, he felt a profound shift. He realized he wasn't just in love with a wife, he was in awe of a leader. This journal was no longer a private medical record. It had become the North Star for their future reign. Kate had used her own fragility to find the strength for an entire nation. She had turned a recovery room into a strategic war room, and from the darkness of her illness, she had lit a torch for the future of the House of Windsor. The deep shadows of the study seemed to retreat as Prince William turned to the pages dated just weeks before the public remission video was filmed. It was in this section that the journal transformed from a diary of recovery into a direct conversation. William's breath hitched as he realized Catherine had written these entries, knowing he might one day find them. She wasn't just recording her thoughts, she was issuing an invitation to a revolution. She wrote about the two Williams, the man the institution demanded he be, and the man she knew he truly was. "They want you to be a monument," Kate wrote. in a hand that was now steady and powerful. They want you to be cold, immovable, and predictable. But monuments eventually crumble under the weight of time. I need you to be a movement. She described the nights she watched him return from public engagements, exhausted by the theatricality of the crown, and how it pained her to see his natural empathy suppressed by the rigid expectations of the gray men. In this journal, Kate revealed that her time in the shadows wasn't just for her own healing, it was to create a space where William could finally drop his guard. For our audience, who have spent a lifetime navigating the balance between their professional duties and their personal truths, this is the emotional kill point of strategic partnership. They recognize that behind every great leader is a partner who sees the truth they are forced to hide. Kate was proposing a silent pact, a shared vision, where they would no longer be pawns of the palace PR machine. She outlined a plan for a co-leadership, where her strategic intelligence would complement his institutional authority. She was essentially telling him, "We are not just the future of the crown, we are the cure for its survival." William read Kate's analysis of their shared strength. She had identified the exact moments when their unity had terrified the palace advisors. She noted that the firm thrives on the divide-and-rule tactic, often pitting family members against one another to maintain control. Kate's response was to build an unbreakable bond of total transparency. She revealed she had been quietly aligning with key modern thinkers, philanthropists, tech leaders, and grassroots organizers who were ready to support a monarchy that actually moved with the pulse of the people. The most shocking part of this section was Kate's question of the throne. She asked William directly, "When the crown is placed on your head, will it be a weight you carry for them, or a light you shine for everyone else?" This question changed everything for William. He realized that Kate had used her illness to find the courage he had been searching for. She had decoded the physiognomy of power and realized that true authority doesn't come from a title, but from the bravery to be authentic in an inauthentic world. As William finished this chapter, he looked at the leather-bound book as if it were a holy relic. He wasn't just reading his wife's journal. He was reading the founding document of their future reign. The discovery was now complete in his mind. Kate had not just survived a medical crisis. She had engineered a moral one. She had handed him the keys to a kingdom that was no longer built on secrecy, but on the unbreakable pact of a husband and wife who decided to change the world together. As the first hints of dawn began to gray the horizon outside Adelaide Cottage, Prince William reached a chapter in the journal that felt almost sacred. Tucked between the pages was a photograph he hadn't seen before, a close-up of Catherine's hand, the iconic sapphire and diamond engagement ring catching a sliver of light. This ring, which once belonged to his mother, had always been a heavy burden for William, a constant reminder of a legacy of beauty and sorrow. But through Kate's written words, the ring was being reborn. She wrote about the sapphire seal, the silent promise she made to Diana every time she looked at her hand during her darkest hours of treatment. "I used to wear this ring as a tribute," Kate wrote, her script becoming almost poetic in its depth. "But during this recovery, I realized I must wear it as a shield." Diana was the people's princess, but she was never allowed to be her own person. "I will be both." She described how the palace had originally wanted her to be a carbon copy of the past, to use the nostalgia for Diana to paper over the cracks of the modern institution. But Kate's journal revealed her quiet refusal. She didn't want to be a ghost. She wanted to be a guardian. For our viewers, many of whom remember exactly where they were when William and Kate announced their engagement in 2010, this is the emotional kill point of redemption and full circle closure. They have watched this ring for 40 years, through two different women and two different eras. Seeing Kate claim the ring not as a victim's heirloom, but as a strategist's badge of honor, creates a powerful sense of psychological justice. Kate was documenting the physiognomy of the sapphire, how the stone didn't just represent royalty, but the resilience of a woman who had seen the bottom of the abyss and decided to climb back out on her own terms. William felt a profound sense of release as he read Kate's final instructions for their public re-emergence. She had meticulously planned her return to the public eye, not as a staged PR event orchestrated by the palace, but as a raw, honest moment of connection. She wrote about the authenticity of the scar, arguing that the world didn't need a perfect princess, they needed a real one. The public is tired of the velvet curtain, she noted. They want to see the light through the cracks. The journal revealed that Kate had been secretly working on a new protocol of truth. She wanted to end the era of never complain, never explain, and replace it with always connect, always protect. She realized that by being honest about her struggle, she had gained more power than the palace could ever grant her. She was no longer just a member of the royal family. She was a leader of a global conversation on health, survival, and the human spirit. William realized that Kate had spent her time in the shadows doing what no king or queen had ever dared. She had humanized the crown. She had taken the most famous ring in the world and turned it into a seal of a new social contract. As he looked at the sleeping woman in the next room, William knew that the discovery he had made tonight had ended his old life. He was no longer just the heir to an ancient throne. He was the partner of a woman who had saved the monarchy by refusing to let it hide her soul. The sapphire seal was no longer a symbol of what was lost, but a promise of what was about to begin. The first rays of the morning sun began to filter through the windows of the study, casting long, golden streaks across the oak table where the leather-bound journal lay. Prince William reached the final page, his fingers lingering on the last few lines of his wife's handwriting. The ink here was different, steady, calm, and imbued with an undeniable sense of peace. There were no more secrets to uncover, no more strategic blueprints to decode. There was only the truth. William realized that the man who had walked into this room at midnight was not the same man who was standing there now. The discovery had performed its final task. It had completed his transformation. Kate's closing entry was a simple but profound reflection on the nature of time and legacy. "We spend our lives building walls to protect the crown," she wrote, "only to realize that the crown is just a circle of gold. It is the people within the circle and the people we serve outside of it that give it meaning. I am ready to step back into the light, not as the woman I was, but as the woman I have become." She didn't ask for his agreement. She had simply stated her reality. She was ready to lead a monarchy that was no longer afraid of its own humanity. For our audience, who have spent decades building their own legacies, navigating their own health crises, and protecting their own families, this is the ultimate emotional kill point of resilience and new beginnings. They are not just watching a royal story. They are watching the triumph of the human spirit over an ancient, rigid system. They see in Kate a reflection of their own strength, the ability to take the most difficult chapters of life and turn them into a manifesto for change. The physiognomy of the dawn wasn't just about the weather. It was about the clarity that comes after a long, dark night of the soul. William slowly closed the journal, the soft click of the leather cover sounding like the closing of an old era. He looked at the book, a quiet object that held the power to shift 1,000 years of tradition. He realized that "It changes everything" wasn't just a headline. It was a vow. The monarchy would no longer be a fortress of secrecy. Under his and Catherine's leadership, it would become a house of glass, transparent, honest, and resilient. He felt a strange sense of gratitude for the illness that had forced this pause, for it had given Kate the perspective to save the institution from itself. He walked out of the study and stood at the door of their bedroom, watching the steady rise and fall of Catherine's shoulders as she slept. She was no longer just the mother of his children or the Princess of Wales. She was the architect of their destiny. William knew that when she woke, they wouldn't need to speak of what he had read. The journal had done its work. The silent pact was already in motion. Together, they would step into the public eye, carrying the weight of the crown with a new kind of grace, one that wasn't built on perfection, but on the courage to be real. As the world outside began to wake, unaware that the foundations of the monarchy had shifted in the quiet hours of the night, Prince William felt a calm he hadn't known in years. The secret was out not to the press, not to the palace, but to the one person who needed to hear it most. The future was no longer a burden to be feared. It was a story to be written, one honest page at a time. The era of the hidden queen had ended, and the era of the authentic crown had begun. And in the silence of Adelaide Cottage, the only sound left was the promise of a new day.